Octavia Girl Volume 1. Introduction. Sardius was alone in the interview room as bright lights shone in his eyes and voices rang out from behind the blinding rays. No one was there. The voices from the panel of interviewers rang through a speaker system. He couldn't see them, but there were cameras pointed at him like guns. If he thought they really were guns, he'd perform much better. He always did better when he thought it was a live-or-die situation. The reality of the speaker and camera placement meant that the interviewers could see him while he couldn't see them. That made him uneasy. He didn't look good, but he had to believe that none of the other candidates looked much better than he did. Besides, the job did not require him to be at his best visually. The first grating automated voice began. Sardius, have you been informed of the committee's decision regarding the deceased diplomat, Arvantis? Sardius made his face impassive, even with the lights shining in his eyes. I haven't heard. You were cleared of all suspicion, the voice informed him. Sardius tried to make his exhale shallow so that he didn't look too relieved. If he had been blamed for what happened to Arvantis, he would have broken every camera and light in the room. It wouldn't have been out of rage exactly, but more like popping balloons early at a birthday party that isn't for you, on your birthday. He had such high hopes for the program, and being blamed, even partially, for Arvantis' death was the last thing he needed. If he got kicked out, he hated to think of it. He paused before meekly asking, if this meeting isn't about Arvantis, does that mean Jenna Fairchild has been brought in? Not exactly, another voice piped up. Sardius recognized that voice as belonging to the chair of the Octavian Council. His name was Favel, and his voice wasn't automated like the others were. I was just thinking, Favel said, even though he gave no face for Sardius to see, that you have studied Jenna more than anyone else on our side. You requested to be her personal assistant before you were assigned to Arvantis. The AAMC is still having a horrific time bringing her in, and I was wondering if their tactics are off. Do you have any insights on her recruitment? After all, you were famous for convincing half a solar system to change allegiances. Sardius beamed. He shouldn't have. He didn't mean to, but he did have his private ambitions, and Favel was leading him toward his favorite one. Well, Sardius began, attempting to sound casual even if it was a little late. She'd probably be more willing to go to outer space if there was someone special to escort her. Of course! Favel exclaimed in his odd parrot-like voice. Sardius was pleased with himself, and Favel's reaction had been just what he hoped. Favel went on. Of course, she's reluctant to come into outer space. She doesn't know anyone here. Should we send a welcoming committee or a clutch of— Slow down, Sardius interrupted. Don't send a clutch of anything. She doesn't need a welcoming committee. She needs one person she trusts, admires, and loves to guide her. In short, she needs a mate, Favel shouted, interrupting Sardius. Jenna doesn't have a mate? An automated voice cracked. Isn't she an adult? I thought she was an adult, another voice asked. She is an adult, Favel said with as much authority as his nasal voice would allow. Why doesn't she have a mate? I have a mate. You have 6 mates. I've had 12. Sardius refrained from laughing at the committee members' outbursts. His suggestion was being accepted. He just needed to carry it through to the end. All he wanted was to be taken to Earth to escort Jenna to Octavia Prime. He'd go all the way to Earth for her. Sure, he'd have to make a few adjustments if he was going to go to a place like Earth. He currently looked like a soot stain, but for Jenna Fairchild, he was willing to do just about anything. Besides, romancing Jenna would be a breeze. Those idiots the AAMC had been sending to pick her up were too stupid to be understood. That was why they couldn't get her aboard a pod. Now, if Sardius was the one to go get her, he knew exactly what to say to her that would make her fall in love with a perfect stranger and also make her willing to join him in outer space. We should run her information through the universal matching algorithm, Favel announced. Wait, no! If she was run through that system, Sardius had no chance of being chosen as the perfect man for her. The other committee members were voicing their agreement. Sardius had to stop their scheming immediately. Wait, boys, aren't you jumping the gun? If you think about it, getting a candidate from the universal matching pool is hardly an intelligent way to go about this. Hardly intelligent? They use 850,000 different character markers to test compatibility, a faceless committee member pointed out. Sardius paused in his tracks, momentarily quieted by such sound reasoning. However, he was nothing, if not full of crap. Yeah, I realize that sounds good, but I think you already have a perfect candidate for the job. Who? Look, Sardius, Favel interjected. If we had a decent man among our ranks to send on this side of the universe, I think the AAMC already would have sent him. They've already sent over 200 candidates to try to recruit her. They must not have seen that pursuing this from a romantic angle, though underhanded, may be the only way to secure her cooperation. Sardius tried to speak up, but Favel talked over him. His parrot voice pounded into Sardius's ears like a bird squawking at twice the regular volume. The universal matching algorithm will provide us with hundreds of thousands of candidates. Maybe millions. There's no need for us to take a chance on something that might work when we only need to get her up in the air. Thank you for your cooperation and your suggestion. The equipment you had when you worked for Arvantis will work just fine for Jenna. All the time Favel had been speaking, Sardius had been saying the same thing over and over, though the committee chair wasn't listening, and Sardius wasn't even sure if he had his volume on. Favel might not have heard a word, Sardius said. If Favel had been listening, he would have heard Sardius say over and over, "No, don't send someone else. Send me, send me, send me." The automated voices cut along with Favel's bird-like voice. It was quiet in the room, except for Sardius's howls. "Send me," he said hopelessly one last time. No one answered. The communication lines had been cut. Sardius exhaled heavily before he knocked over his chair. Gah!
Chapter 1. Catastrophe has perfect eyes. Have you seen a golden retriever off his leash? Jenna smiled, not to brag or anything, but men loved her. They were always stopping her and asking her for the time, for the bus schedule, for recommendations for the best restaurants, or literally any question they could think of to engage her in conversation. She had been sitting on a bench in the park for under 3 minutes, enjoying a tea and a bagel, when a reasonably attractive man approached her and asked her if she had seen the golden retriever. She cast her gray eyes up at him, and her cheeks went round and rosy. "I'm sorry, I haven't." He looked around him for the dog, distraught written all over his face. "You don't suppose," he said, looking helpless and confused, "that you might be able to spare a few minutes to help me look for him?" Jenna's face changed. The smile was gone, and instead, her face twitched in the spot just below her eye in sharp irritation. Then she warped her mouth into a deeply unimpressed frown and said, "No, I couldn't." The man turned to her with agony and pleading in his eyes. "He hasn't been missing for very long. He might just be past those trees." The man pointed. Jenna snorted. "Then go look for him just past those trees." He looked at her as though she was the reason he couldn't find his dog, if only she'd be merciful and walk with him a few steps. "Do you have a picture of the dog?" she asked, patience fleeing from her voice as she started gulping her too-hot tea in large swallows. "No, he just got away from me." "I meant on your phone." "My phone?" he asked, looking around him like he didn't understand how that word worked in the sentence she'd just constructed. "You don't have a picture of your dog on your phone?" she questioned as she shoved a quarter of a sliced bagel in her mouth. "Well, it's not my dog. I never said he was my dog," the man insisted quite passionately. "Fine then," Jenna said, washing the remains of her bagel down with the last of her tea. "So it's not your dog." "It's a friend's dog." "Then you'd better hurry up and find him," she said, crumpling up the paper her bagel had been served in and shoving it in her empty disposable teacup. She tossed them in the garbage bin next to the bench and stood up. "You're sure you can't help me?" the man pleaded a second time. "I think you should call your friend, or literally any other human being you know, and ask them for their help," she said in a snarky tone and stepped away from him. As she walked away, she glanced over her shoulder 3 times. Twice as she looked both ways before crossing the street, and once when she was a little further down the block. The man was standing exactly where she'd left him. At least, he wasn't following her. She shook her head. She shouldn't have been so nice to him. She should have told him exactly what she thought, that the line about the missing dog was a cliché line child molesters use to bait children into their vehicles. It was not a reasonable pickup line, but maybe he'd have a debriefing with a friend who could explain how epically he had failed. Hopefully, that would not happen to her or any other woman again, ever. Chapter break. Jenna Fairchild looked very normal. As a matter of fact, she was better than normal. She had blondish hair, gray eyes, a sunny smile, and an open disposition. Not only that, but she took pride in herself and her appearance, which meant she knew how to sculpt her eyebrows properly, and how to do her hair, which was almost always done up in a high, messy bun. If she wore her hair down, a hat usually crowned the top of her head. Her favorite hat was a man's fedora that had belonged to her grandfather, that he had worn after the Second World War. When her hair hung loose, it was almost down to her waist and fell in the kind of curls messy buns created. The styles she adopted were important because Jenna always had to have something covering the crown of her head. She had a terrible secret under the curls of her messy bun, a mass that was always a little too close to her forehead to be really fashionable. Jenna only got away with it because she was so stylish otherwise, with dangling earrings and a perfectly matched scarf. She was also terrifically grouchy when questioned about her bun. No one was going to ask her to change her style twice. When she wore a hat, flirtatious men would often try to tip it. Even women would try to steal it to try it on, but Jenna had sorted out that problem long ago and wore a hat pin. A pair of holes had to be pierced into the precious fedora in order to accomplish it, but it was well worth it. It had been her grandfather himself who punctured the stiff felt, gifting her a hat pin that had belonged to her grandmother, because her grandfather, the last of her relatives as far as she was concerned, had known her terrible secret. He had been in on it. She had to hide the black onyx tiara that was permanently affixed to the top of her head. It was unlike any tiara any woman wore because it had no gems, and a symmetry that belonged in higher-level math classes than just a collection of intricately placed triangles. It was shaped like a large black wave, moving to oppose a smaller one. They seemed like they were moving toward each other, like a black beak about to snap shut, but they never moved. When Jenna was little, she wore a headband to cover it, always in the wrong place, always too high off her head, and she could never take it off. Jenna had never had a real boyfriend. If she had someone that close to her, they would expect the kind of intimacy where she would have to be bareheaded. And she couldn't be. The waves that made up the tiara were sharp on the underside. It wasn't completely unfathomable that a man could tangle his hand in her hair and cut himself in the process. Anytime a man got anywhere near such a thing, images of his blood running down her forehead and between her eyes flooded her mind. In bad accidental fantasies, he cut his finger clean off. Jenna could not allow that, so anytime a man showed interest in her, she blew him off. Though, if she was being honest, she wasn't overly tempted by the men that came her way. What was wrong with them was a little difficult to place. Was it that they weren't good-looking enough? Yes. But if they had been more interesting to her, their looks would have mattered less. Whatever was wrong with the men wasn't obvious. Jenna admitted she was picky, which was why none of her blind dates turned into anything more, and why she never met a man who made her want to let her hair down. Waiting for the perfect man never got boring to Jenna. In the meantime, she led a well-organized, perfectly pleasing life. She had a great apartment, cool friends, vacations, an excellent job, and a cat, if that counted for anything. Everyone she knew reassured her that it didn't. She disagreed. Her cat's name was Charm. She was a white, long-haired, fuzzy thing with deep blue eyes. People who visited Jenna's apartment loved Charm until they tried to touch her, and then the furry little monster would try to claw their faces off. Charm did not like anyone but Jenna, which made her feel like her cat's undying love for her ought to have meant more in the estimation of others. Besides, the cat was excellent company while she waited for the unthinkable to happen. Chapter break. Jenna had always believed that office romances were completely out of line. Couldn't you find anyone to date besides the guys you worked with? Sheesh, take up a hobby. She had never seen a man who was worth breaking her rules over until Orman started doing a radio show. She heard him talking over the radio before she saw him. What was that accent? Where did he come from? Intrigued, she left her cubicle in the advertising department and hurried over to the sound booths. Behind glass, there he was. He was so attractive to her that even though they hadn't yet spoken, she felt as if she were in danger. He was brown. His hair was brown like coffee beans. His eyes were brown like dark chocolate, and his skin was slightly avocado in its brownness. Altogether, he looked sweet, bitter, and healthy. The bone structure and muscle groups under all that brown didn't disappoint. She felt undone just looking at him, just listening to him. Like her carefully plotted life would shortly be ruined. He glanced up from the white paper page he had been reading from and looked directly at her. His voice didn't miss a beat in the announcement he was cheerfully making, but his eyes and his hand acknowledged her. He searched her eyes as he let his fingers slide down the length of a pencil, only to flip it upside down and slide his fingers down it again. More than anything, it was a gesture showing impatience. It was the fidgety way a person moves when they're on an important phone call, but can't wait for it to end. Jenna smiled. He had white teeth. He had shaved that morning. His hands were clean and looked very much like any woman in the world wouldn't have minded him placing one of them on the small of her back to guide her into a room. He looked like a man who had been made just for her. She went back to her desk with a little smile still on her face.